In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee invented the HTML that changed the world. But HTML wouldn't really do much if we couldn't fetch documents from around the world and different computers. For that to happen, Tim built the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP for short. Now, remember these arrows from the diagrams that we've had? We told you that these arrows were simply the connected wires and cables that connected the World Wide Web. This, right? You remember the diagram. But you see, these are just wires. There are no instructions on how to do things. For that, you need something called a protocol. Think of it as a standard that everyone follows. If everyone agrees, then the protocol works and can be used by everyone. HTTP that I have here is a protocol which allows the fetching of resources such as HTML documents. I mean, it's in the name, right? Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Now, with the use of HTML and HTTP, we now have the World Wide Web. We can grab HTML files and receive them. If we go to google.com/about, we go to the About HTML page, we grab it and receive it. So HTTP is the protocol or the rules that we use over the wires. It is the foundation of any data exchange on the web. And it paved the way for something called a client-server protocol, which means requests are initiated by the recipient, which in our case is the web browser. So they send out a request using HTTP. The server now understands what the web browser is saying because it's speaking in HTTP. And the server can now respond with HTML, and the browser understands it because it's speaking through HTTP once again. So you should think of HTTP as a common language that a client and a server can use to communicate. They're simply saying, hey, can you give me this document? And the server can say, yep, no problem, here it is. And up until this point, we haven't really spoken to a server in our app, have we? We build the front-end applications or the client-facing applications using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React. But we lived in our own world, no communications with another computer. HTTP allows us now to communicate with servers, with the outside world. So let's go over the terminology one more time. Clients and servers can communicate by exchanging individual messages. The messages sent by the client, usually a web browser, are called requests, and the messages sent by the server are usually called responses. So if HTTP is the language that allows us to communicate between these two, teach me some of the words, right? I mean, that's a good question. And lucky for you, HTTP is quite easy to learn because you only have a few words. And I'm going to show you what they are right now. You have get, you have post, you have put, and finally you have delete. And now you're thinking, that's it? And yeah, HTTP is beautiful because it's just simple. You don't need to overcomplicate things. You learn these 4 words and these languages, and you can build the app of your dreams. So let's go through it one by one. Get means, well, I want to get an HTML file. So you ask to get something, and the server responds with that request. A post says, I want to post something. So that is, I'm going to send over some data to Google servers, and I want you to post. I want you to add it to your servers or your database. Put is, I'm going to send you some data, and I want you to update some data that already exists in Google servers and just update it with this new information. And then delete means, well, delete a piece of data on the backend, on the servers or on the database. So if we use Twitter as an example, get will be to receive the Twitter feed with all the tweets from today. Post would be if you created a new user and you want to add that user to the Twitter servers. Put would be if you made a tweet but you want to make a change or an edit, so you edit that tweet. And delete will mean, well, you either delete your user account or delete a tweet. And don't worry, we're going to use these when we get to the backend section and we build our final project. Now, over the years, HTTP was extended to not only worry about text, not only fetch hypertext documents like HTML, but also images and videos and post content to servers like with HTML form results. And HTTP can also be used to fetch part of documents to update web pages on demand, which is called AJAX. And we have a video coming up talking about this. But the main idea still stands. Using these 4 verbs we just learned, we can now communicate with servers. All right, so we know that this arrow over here at the top uses HTTP to make requests using one of these 4 verbs. Okay, so I think you get the request part. Now, what does the server respond with? What about response here? The server sends you 2 main things. One is an HTTP message that is something that you've definitely seen before. And I'll link to this W3 Schools resources. A 200 message means successful. You probably have seen 200 OK before. You might have seen 404 messages, which means not found. If you enter a URL that doesn't exist, you'll get a 404. And maybe sometimes you'll get a 500 error message that is, well, there's something wrong with the server. So this is just a number code that comes with every response that tells you the response of the server. So that's the first one. The second one is usually some sort of data, like HTML. And so far, that's what we've been doing, HTML. But in the next videos, I'll show you that it can send other things other than just simple HTML. So let's add to this diagram now. We want to say that this also has a status code, and we'll say 200 for now, that everything was fine. And in the response, we give the status code plus the new HTML file. All right, let's actually demonstrate this online and see how you can watch this action take place. I have over here a great website called example.com, and it's a simple website. You can go visit it right now. But the cool part about it is if you open up your developer console, up to this point, we've looked at the Elements tab and then the Console tab. I want to show you the Network tab that we have here. Now, the Network tab, you might have to click on some of these icons, and you'll see that different things will pop up. Make sure that the filter is gone. Everything is unclicked. And now at example.com, while this is open, just simply refresh. And look at that. I'm going to click on this icon, which makes it a little bit bigger. This is a plugin, so don't worry about this JavaScript. But the top thing, it says example.com, status 200 OK, and type document. And it even tells me the size, the time that it took to get this, which is 53 milliseconds. That's pretty fast. So that means the server responded with 200. If I click on this, I get a whole bunch of things that we don't really need to worry about, but a few things. Request URL, this is what we requested. We get a status code of 200 from the server. And if we click on the response, there's the response message. We received the HTML document from the server. If we go back to headers, we also see that our request method was a get. We did a get request. Let's close this and refresh again. I now get a 304 status. A 304, if we look over here, means not modified. Indicates the request page has not been modified since the last requested. Because I've already requested this now, Google is smart enough to say, oh, I'm not going to worry about the server and requesting the same thing over and over. I already have it memorized, so here it is. Very cool. So network tab is really, really useful for that. All right, so you can go ahead and play with example.com and see for yourself how HTTP works. And by the way, yes, this HTTP that you see here, that's what it means. When you do an HTTP request, it says, hey, do HTTP. We're using the World Wide Web and go request this from the server. Very cool. And if you're wondering about the S, don't worry. I'll let you know at the end of this video what that means as well. All right, now what if I want to send data? If we go back to our diagram, I'm just doing a GET request, but what if I want to actually send some information to the server other than some URL saying I want this information? Well, there's two ways that you can do it. One is something called query string, and then the second one is through the body of the request. So I'm going to show you how both of those work. I have over here the form that we created in our first advanced HTML section when we only knew HTML. Let's open this file up. I have it over here. If I double click, you remember this, don't you? We've come a long, long way. In this form, if you remember, we had a form method get. And now you might understand what this get means. It's saying, with this form, I want you to do a get request. Let's see what happens when I click register while opening the network tab. I'm going to click register. All right, so we have this request. We see that we have made a request and it has created these things called query strings, the first way of sending data to the server. With a GET request, if you want to send information through a form, it adds it to the URL using this question mark, which says, hey, I'm about to send you some query strings, and it's going to have a key and a value. In this case, first name, last name, everything's empty, so there's no information, but otherwise it'll say first name equals Andre. If I click on this, we see that there's query string parameters that we've sent. We have first name, last name, email, password, and birthday, which is blank. But if we scroll down, in cars, default is Volvo, so that we have cars Volvo. So this information now is sent to the server. That's query string parameters using GET. And we did mention one thing though. We see that we have password in here. That's not very secure, is it? If I went back to the form and I type in secret and I click register again, well, now I have my password out in the open, sent over the wire, and I even have it up here, my URL bar. All right, we'll get back to that. So that is one way. The second way is through the body of the request. Let me show you how that works. The way we send information to the body is we use a post request. And this is something that you'll more often see than a GET request, is that we want to add some form data to the server. So we want to post something. If I change this over here, I'm going to save this. And let's open up a new tab with the new saved data. This one is a post form. If I open it up here and I type in password secret and I click on register, I get register.html, but no query strings. If I click on this, I see that now instead of query strings, it's form data. And it even says content type, application, XWW form URL encoded. And this is just an HTML way of saying that this is a form and this is the body, but not displaying here. So now the server can access it not from the query params. And don't worry, I'll show you how servers do that when we get to the backend section. Instead of accessing it through the query params, I can now access it through the form data. So let's go back to the diagram. We now understand that we can do HTTP requests using get, post, put, delete. I can use query strings, which are at the top of the URL, to send the data, or the body of the request. And then the server responds with a status code based on how my request was, and it returns that with a response. But the one issue we saw was that, well, the password was visible in both cases, wasn't it? And what if I have a scary looking person over here. There you go. What if we had a person who was watching our communication, our HTTP requests, and monitoring it? If I used query strings to put my password in there, well, he can just look over my shoulders and see, oh, Andre's password is secret. I can now log into his Google account. Or if I use the body way of sending data, well, he can find a way to get this request to come over to him first and just look at the form data and see that my password is secret. That's not very good, is it? Well, one solution to this was the idea of HTTPS. Now, HTTPS means Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. And you can see over here that W3C uses the secure version of HTTPS. The communication between the browser and the websites are now encrypted. And what does that mean? Encrypted just means that it's jumbled up, so only the client and the server know the secret pass or secret key to read the message. And this S part, the secret, uses a technology called Transport Layer Security, or its predecessor, Secure Sockets Layer, or TLS and SSL for short. So now, even with HTTPS, if the attacker, or what we call a man in the middle, the person who's just monitoring our requests, even if they get our password, it's going to be just complete gibberish. It's going to have something similar to this, and well, that's not our password, so it's going to be meaningless. It avoids that attack. This is just a tip as a developer that you should tell all your friends. If you're ever sending sensitive information, maybe logging into a bank account, make sure that there's HTTPS out there. If there's no HTTPS when you're sending maybe your login with your password, well, that's not secure. All right, let's review. Your web browser is a HTTP client sending requests to the server machines. When the browser user enters file requests by either opening a file or typing a URL or clicking on a hypertext link, an anchor tag, the browser builds an HTTP request and sends it to communicate with the server. Now the server can get information back to us. The earliest version, we could use URL parameters such as google.com/about and just specifically get HTML. That was it. Then came the form. So we can now actually send more data other than just the URL saying we want to go to this HTML file. Now we can use get or post to send data, either through a body or a query string. And a server can take action based on that data and return a new page. And this is the foundation of the web and how the World Wide Web we have now was made possible through client-server communication. In the next few videos, we're going to learn even more to really understand this power. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.